This is the Adoptive Mom Podcast. Adoption may look different for each family, but we need solidarity from other crazy people who took this leap. And that is what we do here. We encourage, we build up, we share the wins and losses. We lean on each other, and we get through this together. Thanks for joining us. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Adoptive Mom Podcast, Season 2, Episode 7. Today, we are going to talk to Karen LaBarr. Now, if you listen to Season 2, Episode 1 with Christy Harmon, we kind of teased this episode a little bit. So Karen is actually Christy's mother, and Christy was adopted at birth, and she has a brother who was also adopted at birth. And as she was talking about the love that her adoptive parents had for her bio parents, I knew instantly that I had to talk to these people. And so I was so excited that Karen was willing to sit down and chat with me just about her faith and God's sovereignty to come alongside them as they talk to their kids about hard stuff. And now having two successful adults that they have raised from birth, I am so excited that we get to learn from her wisdom. So let's hear from her, Karen LaBarr. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Adoptive Mom Podcast, Season 2. I'm super excited to be in Season 2. That is so exciting. So I'm thrilled to death to bring you today's guest because we have already talked to her daughter, and you guys heard how infectious her personality is and how just wise beyond her years she is. And she credits it all to this lady that we're talking to right now. So welcome, Karen. How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. And I credit the Lord and just natural personality to where Christy's coming from. And we did invest a good bit in her upbringing as far as pointing her to the Scripture and to the Lord. So he's done it all. But thank you very much.
Great points. And that's kind of what we want to get into today, because after I talked to your daughter, Christy, I think it was maybe 2 days later, and I texted her and I was like, okay, I've got to talk to your parents. I have to, because I don't know, you guys seem to have so much wisdom, and I'm excited to jump into all of that. So on that note, can you just introduce us to your family a little bit?
Sure. Jim and I got married in our mid-30s, and when we started trying to have children, figured out pretty quickly that I had major infertility problems, and partly because of my age, I did not want to go too far with infertility treatment. I just felt like it was twisting God's hand, and that He had a different plan for us, and Jim, of course, agreed with that. We were definitely in that whole decision-making process together. So we quit at kind of an early stage in the infertility process, and began to find out more about adoption. And strangely, just as we were pursuing the idea of a private adoption, because we didn't know anybody who adopted through agencies, we were approached by a friend of mine who told us about a girl who was pregnant and was looking for, quote, a good Christian family. So, and we were on my friend's heart, and this was actually an older woman that I didn't know all that well, but anyway, she was prompted to call us and see if we would be willing to consider it. So we did get linked up with Christy's birth mother, Bonnie, and we communicated through an attorney and sent profiles, and she received us as who she felt God wanted her to entrust her child to. And then about maybe 2 or 3 years later, probably 2 years later, we were thinking about adopting again, and thinking about doing a private adoption, because again, we didn't know anybody who had adopted through an agency in our circle of friends. So in that time period, I met a woman who had been a birth mother or pregnancy counselor with an adoption agency on the West Coast. And when I got to know her, she was just delightful. And when I got to know her, she really emphasized to me, and I'll credit her with really opening my eyes to what adoption is from the birth parent's point of view, and the sacrifice it is, and the ways that that birth mothers need to be affirmed and appreciated in order to heal from the sorrow and the loss of placing a child in adoption. And when I told her, she very strongly urged me to talk with Jim and work on, should we be adopting through an agency. And when I told her that I didn't know people who had adopted through agencies in Georgia, she said, well, I think my agency would work with you. And we got connected with her agency, which was in Seattle. And we were selected by a birth mother who was very young and had gotten pregnant by an older person, a guy in his mid-20s. And in any case, she chose us to be the parents for her baby, who was due in, I think it was 3 weeks. He came a week early, and we flew out to Seattle and stayed out there while the interstate adoption paperwork went back and forth. So we had 2 kids then, almost exactly 4 years apart. And just so much enthusiasm in our family, extended family, everywhere about these two blessings. And ever since talking with that friend and getting more involved in thinking about what could I do to encourage other women to choose adoption, as you know, or even think about it, I just started studying more and more about adoption in general, and about birth mothers and their situations, and how to bless them, and why that's not only important to the healing of the birth parents, but also it's an important communication and an important thing for the adopted children to know of the fact that they were loved from before birth, and that they were loved by their birth mothers enough that they would entrust them to a prepared married couple who we believe God selected to raise them, to be their parents. So that's kind of where a lot of my philosophy comes from, is just having gone through those experiences.
That's so awesome. I love hearing that. So, okay, we know your daughter's name is Christy, and what is your son's name?
David.
David, awesome. And he's 4 years younger than Christy, you said. So
he's 23 and she's 27 right now.
Right. So that's nice and spread out. You got to spread the baby years out a little bit, get some sleep in between, right?
Well, yeah. we did some scheduling, so we got sleep pretty quickly after they came to us. And,
oh my gosh, we did scheduling too.
Yeah, I think, you know, well, I don't want to get off on marriage. That's not really our subject, but I do think that, well, maybe it is our subject too. It is in every family, but the security of the marriage bond is what gives the child security. And having the child come into your home and working to get to a good schedule where you are getting sleep is essential for keeping yourself and your marriage going. But I know there are a lot of people who disagree with me on that, so I don't see that as make it or break it. But I do think that that it's so important, and maybe even more important for adoptive families, to make sure that the couple is focusing on their relationship. Because they will leave the home, fly the nest, and the two of you are going to be there for the rest of one of your lives. So it's really important that we don't miss out on that number one relationship that I think we need to have right under our relationship with God.
Absolutely. And, I think that marriage issues take a whole nother level when it comes to adoption because, and we pride ourselves on honesty here at the Adoptive Mom Podcast, and we've talked lots of times in different episodes about how one parent might attach quicker than another, and that can definitely cause some strife and discord, and just how we rectify those things. And we actually have a marriage episode coming up here in season 2, which I'm super excited for. So I'm really glad you touched on those things, and we can definitely get into some of that stuff later. But I wanted to hear more about kind of after your children were in your home, what the process was for you guys. Because, we talked to Christy about how you guys started so early with talking to them about their birth parents and praying for them and their story. And I just thought that was so wonderful because as adoptive parents, there's so much fear involved with getting, especially with allowing our children to see or meet their birth families. There's a lot of safety concerns and just fear of what if they won't love me anymore? What if they want to be with her instead? Or, something like that. And the way that Christy was talking about you guys, it seems like you just fully trusted in God. And I was like, I would like a piece of that, please. So, what was kind of your process with you and your husband? Was it a definitive decision that you made? Like, hey, this is the age we're going to start talking about this, or did it just happen?
Well, my husband is very tall, and Christy was tiny, and she just was a very petite girl and still is. So he's 6'9", she's almost 5'1".
Oh my goodness.
And we knew I'm very tall, I'm 5'9", he's 6'9", and pretty much no matter who we adopted, unless the parents were in the NBA or the whatever the women's thing is, the WNBA, we were probably not going to look like we necessarily belong together, and much like interracial adoption situations, and there are a variety of situations where it's just obvious that you're going to that somebody's going to say, why is your dad so tall, or why are you black and your mom and dad are white, or whatever. So I don't know, we just and because we felt like it was really God's way of making our family, God's way of building our family. So we didn't have any hesitation in talking freely about it to our friends. We just viewed it as a tremendous blessing that Bonnie would entrust Christy to us, and then that Amanda would entrust Davy to us. So because that friend had sensitized me to the importance of it, not just for the birth parents, but to honor them, but for the child, to understand that they were loved, that they weren't. There are prevailing myths in our society about adoption, and one of them is that it is abandonment. Well, it's anything but abandonment in an awful lot of situations where the birth mother at great risk to herself in many ways makes a choice that's not very well supported by the culture to entrust her child to someone outside her birth family, and because she wants what she views as best for the child, wants a father, wants a prepared family, doesn't want to bring a child into a crisis situation in her own birth family. So anyway, we just, from the beginning, Jim started calling Christy my darling adopted daughter, which I don't know what adoption professionals would think of that, but just it was a word that they heard, and we would talk about the love that their birth parents had for them, and that that they chose life for them and chose us, and in a way that secures them to you, especially if they were the ones choosing. Typically now in agency adoptions, the birth parents are the ones choosing the couple. It's not our choice. It's their choice. So, it's agreed on. But anyway, just that. And Bonnie, I guess I didn't mention, we got back in touch with Bonnie because this attorney that we had worked through did not believe in contact after the adoption, and he was moving on to other adoptions, and he was an attorney, he wasn't a social worker type, didn't have the capacity to do that. But we began corresponding with Bonnie, sending letters and then pictures. Through the person that had connected us with her family. And we did that probably starting when Christy was 3. And I think writing those letters where I could brag to her birth mother about every little cute thing that Christy said and all the brilliant things that, that she did, all of that, kind of bonded me somewhat to Bonnie, which had already happened before Christy's birth, too, because we corresponded for probably 7 months before Christy's birth. So, it just was natural to talk about them and to pray for them occasionally. I think we got more sensitized to the need to be praying for them as time went on. It just kind of evolved from our mindset of appreciation for who this person is in Christy's life, and then that carried over with Davy, even though his situation was not as positive as Christy's birth parent situation. The girl was just so young, and and that was something we had to deal with as we talked about the birds and the bees, and also as we talked about why he was entrusted in adoption. Why wasn't he with his birth mother? So that's kind of how it started, just out of love for the kids and love for these women who made it possible for us to be parents.
Definitely. And, this question just came up because I hadn't thought of this before, but did you struggle with any jealousy on Davy's part that Christy got to have a relationship with her birth parents?
Well, that came much later. We did not really introduce Bonnie to her personally until her 13th birthday. I wrote to Bonnie and said, would you, I'm asking a bunch of close people in Christy's life to write letters of encouragement and advice as she enters her teenage years. Would you be interested in writing a letter? Don't feel like you have to, but if you'd like to. And by then I knew Bonnie was a very communicative person, and in fact has quite a bit of Christy's personality. I think I know where the personality came from. but her birth father's also very engaging and charming. But anyway, I wrote that letter to her, and she wrote back about a 7-page letter to Christy and enclosed a package of pictures of her pregnant, of her with the birth father, of just her parent. I don't know if she had her parent. I think she had her parents in there, and this letter, and the letter was very affirming of, I know God chose your parents to be your parents, and I'm so grateful, and that kind of thing. And that was the attitude Bonnie had throughout all of our correspondence. I would send these detailed letters to her pretty much every year on her birthday, on Christy's birthday, with a big pack of pictures, and not of us, but of Christy. And then she would write back and just say, I can't believe you want to do this for me. This is so wonderful. So, we built trust through the years of corresponding by letter. And then when Christy was 15, we went on a tour to, we went, actually, when she was 15, we went to Disneyland, and then the birth mother lived close by with her husband and her 2 young boys. And so we went to an hour or two out of the way to go visit her. So that was the first time we met face to face. And then when Christy was 17, we went to her parents' home, to Bonnie's parents' home, and met her parents, her brother, a cousin, and they introduced us. They had a little luncheon for us with their friends from church who had always prayed for Bonnie and prayed through the pregnancy and knew all about us from them. And they wanted those people to meet not just Christy, but us and Davy. And so that's kind of the stage. And then the next time, and actually I guess the latest time we saw any of that, Jim and I saw any of them, was at Christy's wedding. We invited Bonnie, her husband, the two boys, and Bonnie's parents to sit with the family in the wedding.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and then about 2 years, well, I guess 2.5 years ago, we felt like something's missing here. Christy had connected with her birth father after she got married, and then I had communicated with him on Facebook a good bit, and then Jim and I planned a trip to meet him, and we took him out to dinner. I think we chatted for about 5 hours over dinner. But so things have evolved. I think if I could do it a little differently, I might have waited a little bit longer until Christy's identity was more set than it was at age 15 for her to meet Bonnie. I think there was a slight bit of confusion, and she was kind of young to understand what it would mean to Bonnie to meet her. And I think Bonnie was mature enough to handle that. Christy, I think, might have been a little disrupted by it. But now there are so many very open adoptions where there's a lot of interaction, and I think getting good counsel as you go through that process, through the agency, or just reading some really good books or whatever. I think it's every adoption situation's different, and the birth parents are different. With Davy, we had signed up to keep his birth mother informed. The birth father left the state because of the situation. She was underage, and he could have been arrested for statutory rape, I suppose. But anyway, he was not in the picture much, and we had very little information about him. But we communicated with her for 2 years, and then the arrangement was that she would ask for additional updates as often as 3 times a year. And we met her actually before she chose us. We went out there and she checked us out with her counselor and us over a lunch. And then she decided she did want us to be his parents. And then 2 weeks later, we flew back and took custody of him, but had to stay out there in Washington State until the paperwork went back and forth. And we took her out to lunch a week after she gave birth to him, and she held him and fed him. And but then after the 2 years, she didn't pursue continuing the correspondence. And it may be just that she was so young and not ready for that. I would like to connect with her. Davies looked for her a little bit, but hasn't registered or done anything really overt to try to find her. And with him being an adult, I feel like that's his decision. We are not going to pursue it apart from him. So
do you mind if I ask you? I mean, I just was taking note of a couple of things during
Sure.
that part. So first of all, and I'm not sure of either of their situations other than what you've told me, and Christy told me even less. So, which is great. You know, I think that there's so much to be said of protecting someone else's story. But because I don't know, you know, I don't know if there were drugs involved or if there was anything
No.
growing up with your two children that you had even the opportunity to be bitter towards birth families to about. And I ask that because for those of us who have adopted through foster care, that bitterness is very, very real. And it's so hard to honor someone's birth family when you are still reaping the consequences of their decisions. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yes. I do. I do. No, no, neither of them had anything really hot like that we had to deal with. And I think that would be harder to trust God with. And I think going into it, that's one of the things that I hope that the training or preparation that you're getting in order to adopt out of foster care, that would be very realistic about what the difficulties might be with things like fetal alcohol syndrome or withdrawal from drugs or whatever like that. And I like Christy works with an adoption agency, and I love their outlook on the whole process is that this is all part of God's plan, and that when you enter into an adoption relationship, you are entering into a relationship with the birth family and with that child's history, and that part of your role as an adoptive parent and your child needs to be trained to view the birth parent also as part of the mission that God has for them, that they are, and you as the adoptive parents are in a unique position to communicate the love of God, His mercy, forgiveness, and the gospel to the birth parents like no one else in the world. And I think that's very healthy. And frankly, I think we went into it thinking, oh, wow, this is a great way to form a family. And we were, I think, pretty naive to what the possibilities could be. And yet, I don't know. I mean, we've had some difficulties that I would say may have had some genetic component to them with our son, some psychological issues that he's dealing with extremely well right now. We are blessed, but there have been some rocky times along the way that may it may have. But there's a book I'd recommend called Telling the Truth to Your Adopted or Foster Child. And I've met the author, one of the authors, who is Jane Schooler, Schooler. And in that book, she talks about things just such as that. And the emphasis, as the title would imply, is that the child needs to understand where they're coming from, because people around them know, and they will know. And besides, it is their story. So she advises like a soft progression, I would call it, of revealing the difficult truths in age-appropriate ways over time. So, like, this comes up even in teaching about sex to adopted children, because you can't say this is what a married most of the Christian books start with a married couple and a mommy and a daddy and looking like them and all these other things that aren't terribly appropriate. Maybe there have been a lot of new ones put out in recent years that are suitable for adoptive children, but the in my telling them, I would, they were conceived basically in a sinful relationship, and so to communicate the truth and beauty about God's view of sex, and yet where did they come from? You've got to confront it. And the way I put it when they were young was they were doing things when they weren't married that are fine for married people to do, but it's not okay for unmarried people to do. But God had a plan. And so you see what I mean? There are difficulties that need to be explained, even in the easiest of situations. And I would say Christie's was probably one of the easiest, and Davies was moderate, not severe like you're saying, out of foster care. But the book that I'm mentioning does go into very difficult situations. The parents in prison, the mom who murdered the dad, what crazy things that just are part of their story, that there are people around them who know that story, and it's going to come out at some point. They need to hear it from you. And she strongly suggests that it be covered before puberty.
And why is that?
Her view is, and I think I definitely agree with this, that when a child hits around puberty, parents start knowing nothing in their view. And before that time, you have a chance of shaping not just their understanding of the truth, but of their attitude toward it. And if you wait, they develop, number one, a resistance to your viewpoint on about anything, but on something as important as this, and the fact that they are interacting with more and more people, means that that they could hear it. It's more likely that they could hear it from someone else with a totally different slant on it, and they will make up their own viewpoint on it. So it's not a once and done conversation. I think Christy and praying for them and things like that. It's an ongoing, normal part of life, that not that you are always talking about it, but that you are freely talking about it, and that in communicating and taking the initiative to communicate, I think that's, you've probably heard that from other people, that it's just really important for the adoptive family to give the child permission to know about their origin, because a lot of them will try to protect you from from feeling unloved, or feeling that they are hurting you by asking about it. There's a hesitation on the part of a lot of adopted kids to they feel like they'll be perceived as being disloyal, and that's, that if you're freely talking about it, then you're showing that you're not going to be jealous about their interest. You're not going to freak out over it. You're not going to react, to slap them down if they ask about it. And they have fears about all those things, or some do. Some aren't even interested in it, but I think even if they don't express any interest, it's just really important for the parent to take the initiative to bring up the subject, and then to do it always telling the truth, but not the complete adult version of the truth, but to pace it as the child's understanding grows, to be able, to just at the very beginning, well, your mommy couldn't take care of you, so she loved you and found Daddy and me so that we could take care of you. and God wanted us to be a family. Something like that for a very young child. And then as they get older, then they're going to understand more and more about adoption just from the culture. And there are myths out there, and you're the myth buster. So, if it's either your version or the culture's more negative version that they're gonna have available to them. And I just think in self-defense,
Yeah.
you wanna make sure that you're the one telling them.
So I want to go back to what you said about telling your kids, not wanting them to be afraid. And I think that is so powerful. So if you don't mind even just repeating that, because I want to hear it again, and I know that the listeners probably do too.
You mean that the child would be afraid to broach the subject for fear of hurting or angering their parents. I just think that's a natural reaction that most of them have, and it's an awkward. They know that something's different, in their experience than in their friend's experience. Now, maybe Christy told you that she kind of took it to the extreme. We would say your birth mother loved you so much, and we would use her name, that she placed you for adoption. She entrusted you to our family for adoption, and she tells a story that she one time said, I love my baby doll so much when I'm gonna give her an adoption to another family.
Yeah.
So
she did tell that story.
Yeah, she's that's maybe we overdid it, but no, I don't think they can ever be told too much that they were loved. And even in the situation where there is very difficult, like for example, a child who is born with a drug problem, the mother so easily could have chosen abortion. Her willingness to choose life is a evidence of love, and her willingness to just carry that child through all 9 months of pregnancy is commendable. There are other options these days, and she could have avoided a lot of. She could have bought into some other heartache, but she could have avoided a lot of difficulty, probably by choosing abortion. So, I think we need to find what's commendable in them and just honor them as the birth parents that God chose for that baby. That baby was not conceived only by the will of two human beings. God's will was in the middle of there too, and that child's a precious image bearer of God Most High, and that we honor. So I just think bringing it up and talking about just the whole issue of adoption is just freeing to the child, to enable them to know that when they have questions, or if a friend says something stupid, or if somebody says something about their tough story, that they're in a position to have already in their minds a positive view of adoption, and that it's a biblical way to form a family. That's another, I think, really important, essential thing for kids to know. Jim and I weren't related, but we're family because of marriage. We're not biologically related to either of our kids, but we are a family because of adoption, because that's one of the ways that God forms a family: marriage, birth, and adoption. So, just having the right, even theological mindset about adoption being a valid way to form a family, I think is a healthy starting point.
Absolutely. Oh, that's so awesome. So, if you don't mind my asking, we were talking about this fear, and we've been talking about that in a few different ways. Just fear on your kids' part of not hurting you in their curiosity about, where they come from, and then fear on our part as adoptive parents of where is this going to lead? Is this going to be my downfall? Is this going to hurt me? And I think that those selfish thoughts are so natural. And it sounds like you and your husband did an incredible job of putting those feelings aside. But I have to ask, was there a time when you were scared? I know that you said your son had done some digging on his own. Does that freak you out at all?
No. With him, we have really urged him to think maturely about this, and that him meeting his birth mother or even his birth father, if that can happen, is fine with us. But he needs to go into it with his eyes wide open, and he needs to be prepared, and he and she need to be prepared for what the expectations are. And she was living what I would call a rebellious teenage life, and hopefully she's straightened out, and I hope she's living a very fulfilled, happy life right now. But that may or may not be the case. And going into it, he needs to go into it not with I just want to see what she looks like, or I just want to meet her and satisfy my curiosity. He needs to think about where she's coming from. So that's my only big caution with him, is that because there hasn't been communication for so long, we don't know, and he won't know where she's at and what her expectations would be. So he needs to be sure that if he does pursue it, that he approaches it wisely. And I would encourage him to work with someone who does reunifications in an adoption agency. The one Christy works with facilitates reunions, and there's one here in Atlanta where we live that does that too. So because there does need to be preparation on both sides in terms of expectations.
Yeah.
When Christy met Bonnie, it was like, why is this lady crying and so happy and hugging me? And, I don't even know her. And because she didn't know her. I felt like I knew her. I felt like we kind of adopted her in the process of adopting Christy, because we communicated with her for years. And we communicated for 7 months before she was born, and I felt very bonded to her. And then when we resumed the communication, over those years, I felt very, very invested in her. But Christy didn't have that kind of, and she was 15 when she met her. 15-year-olds just aren't really tuned into what adult life is about and what having a child would be about. So, I think we did a pretty good job of preparing her. I think, like I said, it would have been a little better to wait longer, but that's kind of more where we view it, is what's best for the child and what's best for the birth parents. And someone who's actively drug addicted, I would really hesitate to introduce my child to a birth parent who's in that situation, or there just needs to be caution and wisdom depending on the situation. But once they're adults, they can make that decision themselves. adult equals 18 in most most places. So that's really sooner than what you imagine.
Yeah, definitely. That's
If you've got a 15-year-old, that's what
yeah.
that's coming really soon.
So would you chalk up that lack of fear to just being informed, or would you say that it had a lot more to do with blind faith?
I'd say developing some relationship between the adoptive family and the birth family, that's ideal. For you to just know what you're dealing with, so that you can deal with whatever hardships would come up, if there are red flags that do happen, that you'd have some clue about it. I don't know. I think part of, I guess, an underlying philosophy of just parenthood that I think is really important, especially for adoptive families, is that these children do not belong to me. They belong to God, and they are being stewarded by me, and they are not mine. I am responsible for protecting them, for providing for them, but I have no guarantees of what their lives will be. Now the older they get, the more you see how very little control you have, and how any control you thought you had was really ceded to you by them. It was not that you were able to control them, but they were willing for you to take the lead on things, or they were willing to follow your lead on things. But more than that, the intention is for them to become independent adults, and that process starts really early, and we need to be relinquishing them to the Lord more and more. And you send them off to school, and no longer know everything that's going on in their day, and then it just keeps going on from there. And learning that control is not the point. It's trusting God and doing the best you can and equipping them the best you can, but it's not ownership. And their story is going to be their story, and it may not be the story you pick out for them. So I think that underlying philosophy of I believe that's a biblical view of parenting, is that it's not a matter of control, domination, ownership, that kind of thing. It's a stewardship responsibility. And I think the birth parents who have made the choice to carry the baby to term, and to choose a family, and to choose adoption, that is the way that they responsibly have stewarded their child. So that wouldn't be the coming out of foster care kind of a situation, but anybody who's choosing, and maybe in the foster system there are situations where the birth parents are saying, I can't do this, I want them to go ahead and be adopted, and they voluntarily relinquish them. Others have it removed from them, but in the cases where they're making a decision, it's a decision of stewardship. And I think if more of our American culture viewed children that way, there would be more children available for adoption, because it clarifies that it's a responsible, loving decision for someone to make when they see that they are unable to handle the parenting themselves, or when they want better for their child than being in a home with no father. who's invested and present and available.
Right. And actually, the person that hooked me up with your daughter was someone who was in that situation. And she's been on the podcast before. Her name is Sarah Avery, and she is just a wonderful Christian woman. And that was exactly her situation. She knew she wanted her child to have a father in the picture, constantly present. And I think that's the most selfless, honorable decision that you can make.
Yeah. Yeah. And if the culture supported it more, I think far more children would never get into the foster care system. But I think the culture and some of the families are saying, you can do this. And in situations where somebody as mature as you are, your age, your education, your upbringing, whatever, you couldn't handle some of what some of these people are trying to handle. I couldn't handle it, but they don't have permission to consider adoption in the culture that they're making the decision in. So then their child ends up in the foster system because it's beyond what they are capable of handling, or they're impaired by drugs or whatever. And if this were more of an option, a real option to women in tough situations, then I think the children could be placed at birth instead of go through the tough process of the foster system. And so,
yes,
my opinion.
Yeah, no, amen, sister. I agree with you 100%. And so on that note, do you mind if we jump into some of these closing questions that I have for you?
Okay.
And if you want, you can just go ahead and answer them through the lens of everything that we've been talking about, just raising these kids from when they were placed in your home until adulthood, and just the ins and outs of having those hard conversations and just everything that we've been talking about. So my first question that I ask everyone is, so what do you wish that someone had told you at the beginning of this journey?
I wish I'd known from the beginning what Bonnie's needs would be, so that I would have maintained communication with her and assured her that Christy was loved and cherished, and that we were honoring her. I'm so glad that it was early in her life and that we did reconnect with her, early in Christy's life, that we reconnected with her birth mother. I wish I'd known that. And I wish I'd had more of that perspective that part of our role as adoptive parents is to do whatever we can to minister to the birth parents and birth family.
Oh, that's so good. I love that just soundbite, just that it is our role as adoptive parents. I love that.
It's sacrificial on our part in some situations. I think more so in more difficult situations. But God gives grace. I think He can give you the grace to be who you should be wisely. And again, there's wisdom that's got to be involved in some of these very tough situations.
Definitely. So, okay, second question. What is something that you wish you had done differently? Probably understood that Christy's story and Davey's story is much more their story than mine, and that I need to be cautious about what I share with whom, to just because I may not have honored them or honored their birth parents with some of the more negative things
that were involved. I think I did a fairly good job on that, but I wish I'd understood. Just if someone had said to me, "Well, don't forget, this is Christy's story and this is Davy's story. It's not your story." I think that would have been a good regulator for what I would share with whom, and maybe I would narrow the scope of the number of people who knew a little bit too much as it was happening.
Gotcha. That's an interesting one. I would have never guessed that, just hearing Christy talk and how mature she seems in regards to her birth family story and to her story and to your story. And I would have never guessed that would be a regret of yours.
Well, what I'm saying is like to relatives and to friends.
Right.
Not okay. Yeah. Her story really was about as ideal. Now she's had some bumps in how does she balance, especially now that she's got us and she's got in-laws and she's got her birth mother's family and she's got her birth father's family that she's all connected with, and trying to prioritize that in light of what their expectations might be at any given time. That's been difficult for her, and there've been other things about their relationship that she's had to really think through, and figuring out boundaries and that kind of thing. Has not been all copacetic. I don't know what it would be like if Davy were connected with his birth family.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay, so question number 3, and it's a 2-part question. So what is your favorite way that your tribe supported you through your adoption story? Maybe in those early days, or maybe when, you were nervous about Christy meeting her birth mom or anything like that.
I think just the immediate and the extended family just totally embrace them as our children and as blessings. Now, my parents were very hesitant, and they lived in another state, and in a way that was good. They had the attitude of, you don't know what you're going to get, and interestingly, in Jim's family, there's a genetic issue that took the life of one of the kids, and the other 2 kids share the same genetic problem, and they have had to have a bunch of like they can't use certain medicines. They've got restrictions on their lives that haven't made things horrible, but it's a scary thing. So basically, you don't know what you're going to get, no matter where your child comes from. It's not like look around at the families and say, gee, these are their flesh and blood, these brilliant people, and who've terrific athletes, all this other stuff, and these people have kids who've got issues that they weren't expecting either, and so we just don't know, but I think for the most part we were so proactive about it that we probably repelled some of we deflected maybe some of what might have been negative, just by having such a happy, grateful attitude to have these children, and when things have been difficult, Davy has been a workout from day one. He's He's his own man. He's been keeping us on our knees and on our toes for his entire life. He's just a real strong kid, and through all of that, our friends and church family and our immediate and extended family, they've all been on our team, and that's been wonderful. But I think part of that is we don't take credit for the good, and we don't take all the credit for the tough stuff either. We again, back to control. Can I control him? No. When have I been able to control him? Well, I used to be able to stuff him in a car seat and, buckle him in. But you look at God's parenting of Adam and Eve, and both of them went haywire. And then his grandson killed the other grandson, if you want to look at it from that point of view. God's grandson, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Cain killed Abel. People are going to make their own decisions. So when we accept too much credit for how awesome a child is, we're setting ourselves up for saying, oh, yes, and we are totally responsible for how difficult another one might be, or how difficult this one's going to be in a couple years. So I think just we've tried to be real with people, and they've been supportive of us.
That's great. And that, so my second part of that question is, what have people done that has maybe hurt you or made you feel misunderstood? And do you think that maybe you answered it when you were talking about your parents' hesitancy, or was there something else?
Yeah, that was hurtful. But I also knew that they were from a different generation, and that they didn't have the biblical grounding that Jim and I had to just see the purpose of every life, and to understand that even if things were difficult, that that God's grace would be sufficient. So I think that just in a way blowing off some of the misunderstandings other people have, not taking it personally, but just going, oh, they don't really understand. And doing that also, teaching your kids to kind of do that too. I'm made in God's image. I am the way I am. If other people don't appreciate it, it's more their problem than mine. That kind of thing, with appearance, with talents, with all kinds of things. Building some resilience in by just, some people just don't understand. That's just a good thing to have in your arsenal, I think.
That's just some good basic wisdom, and I love it. Okay, so last question here. What is, if you could sum it all up, what is your biggest piece of advice or encouragement to adoptive families?
I'd say to really work hard at maintaining your relationship with God, even if it's little snatches here and there when the kids are young and really active, and you're not getting much sleep and things are crazy. Just being mindful that, I may need to get up a little earlier to spend time with them, with the Lord, and to hang on to Him, and maybe squeezing it in throughout the day, spending time with Him, and then maintaining your relationship with your spouse, because you've got to be a united team, and you've got to work out the tough things that may come up, and every family has tough things that come up. So I think that's the biggest thing, is having your priorities straight. God first, your spouse second, and your kids third. That's that's a formula for every family, but I think especially for adoptive families. And then to communicate lovingly and respectfully about their birth families, and to trust God with that, to lean on Him and communicate honestly but carefully and age appropriately with the children.
Awesome. Well, this has been such a pleasure to hear all of your seasoned adoptive mama wisdom, and I'm so excited that you had some time for us tonight. So thank you so much, Karen.
I enjoyed it.
Good. Well, where can we see cute pictures of you and your family?
I guess Facebook. It's Karen LaBarr on Facebook.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Karen LaBarr.
And you'll see a lot of encouragement for considering adoption and buying a Choose Life license plate.
Well, there's even more incentive to send you a friend request, right?
Yep. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Have a good night. Thank you for listening to the Adoptive Mom Podcast. I know this stuff is hard, and I hope you found encouragement here. Remember, you are enough, and you're doing a great job. God wants to be at the center of this journey, and He is big enough to redeem all of our mistakes. Don't forget to check out show notes and other resources at theadoptivemompodcast.com. Thanks again for listening.